All right, let's get this started. My name is Leah Ratley, and I'm going to be doing racial profiling in the United States. Racial profiling takes place when anyone uses race or ethnicity for believing a certain individual will commit or has already committed a crime. This can happen to any race, ethnicity, or gender. Some examples of racial profiling are a Muslim female college student is walking from her dorm to campus when law enforcement stops her and asks her where she's going and why she has a backpack. The officer then asks to search her backpack because she's acting suspicious, even though she hasn't done any harm. A Caucasian male is riding his bicycle along the sidewalk when it's starting to get dark out when he's stopped by a law enforcement officer. The officer then asks if he can do a pat down because it's starting to get late. And that's usually when criminals will come out, but the officer won't say that. An African-American male is driving down a street in a white neighborhood to find their friend's house when they're stopped by law enforcement and asked what they're doing and where they're going. The law enforcement officer then asks the individual if they can search their vehicle without giving them a reason, but in the officer's mind, it's because they look out of place and like they don't belong there. And this picture perfectly describes that. All of these are examples of racial profiling because the officer is acting on a stereotypical belief they have against a certain group. So is racial profiling the same as stereotyping? Well, it's not. It's completely different. Racial profiling is when an individual acts on a stereotypical belief. A stereotype is a belief held by an individual about a certain group, like Muslims are terrorists, a Black person is criminal, a blonde female is ditzy, and so on. Some examples that help distinguish the difference are, well, my father believes that if an individual of any color wears their hat backwards and has sagging pants, then they're associated with a gang because in his eyes, that's what a lot of gang members look like. If someone is dressed in Muslim attire, he's going to automatically associate them as being a terrorist because many Americans view Muslims as being terrorists since the attack on 9/11. All of those are examples of a stereotype. But if he was to act on his stereotypical beliefs, then that would be racial profiling. How did racial profiling start? Well, believe it or not, it's been around for hundreds of years, despite it becoming more of a well-known issue. Before the Civil War, American citizens in slaveholding areas served in slave patrols. These groups had the ability to enter slaves' homes, perform searches randomly, seize any illegal items found in their homes, like books, pens, paper, all of that, because they weren't allowed to read. They were also able to haul them away to wherever, as well as give them beatings whenever they wanted. After the Civil War, some of the slave patrols would serve as the basis for the Ku Klux Klan. And in the 1960s, riots took place in many American cities over the way police treated African Americans, especially because police officers would detain African Americans to control the minority population. And in the 1980s, law enforcement began to use racial profiling as a way to try and stop these drug traffickers and would use a drug courier profile. Well, the DEA took profiling from the airports to the highways and streets of America by creating a program called Operation Pipeline. This program taught officers across the nation how to use profiles in order to catch drug couriers. An average videotape produced for training purposes on what officers should look for would demonstrate on how to properly use these clues to help them find drug couriers with scripted demonstration stops. And in every single video that they used, these drivers had a Spanish surname. So everybody would associate Hispanics as being a drug courier. The intelligence bulletins used for state and local police by the US government encouraged officers to increase their suspicions about a certain race or ethnic group if they were involved in drug interdictions, which created pretextual stops for investigating drug-related crimes. These stops are how an officer will initiate a stop. Profiling was caused not only by the racial bias, but because of the attitudes and beliefs that officers held. Because of how they treated African Americans, racial profiling was born. Officers make decisions when they need to pull somebody over. And it was found that officers can be influenced by their position in regards to citizens when making a decision on how to invoke the law. And not only do officers make decisions based on their positions, but so do prosecutors and judges. This meant that officers looked at wealth, culture, normative status, among other things. Decision-making by officers is also affected by the condition of the neighborhoods. In the 1990s, in the states of New Jersey and Maryland, legal actions were filed against police that looked at racial profiling, which led to studies looking at both state departments. And both state departments showed that racial profiling was an issue because of these studies. The study done over traffic stops made at the New Jersey Turnpike found that 98% of the vehicles on the Turnpike went above the 60-mile-per-hour speed limit, and 14.8% of them were African Americans, and the average number was 13.5 of African Americans that used the Turnpike. So almost everybody was pulled over. In an article that I found, they discuss additional studies done over traffic stops, such as ones done from San Diego and Cincinnati, which I have on my slideshow. And in regards to these traffic stops and how to study them, racial profiling in these stops can be measured by looking at police stop rates in regards to race and ethnicity. Police stop data. According to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, 26.4 million were stopped by police that were over the age of 16. In 2011, there was a higher percentage of males pulled over when compared to female drivers, which was 12% and 8%. However, there was a higher percentage of Black drivers pulled over, which was 13%, with whites and Hispanics being at 10%. Around 80% of the individuals pulled over felt like the officers pulled them over for a real reason. However, Black drivers felt that officers pulled them over for an actual reason, which was 68%, while 74% of Hispanics believed it to be a legitimate reason to pull them over as well. Around 3% of these traffic stops led to a search of the vehicle, the individual driving, or both the vehicle and the individual, with males being searched more than females. However, when it came to Hispanics and African Americans being searched, it was a higher percentage than whites. In New York, African Americans are 6 times more likely to be searched, and Hispanics were 4 times more likely to be searched than whites. If an African American or Hispanic are in a white area, then they have a greater chance of being stopped because they appear to be out of place. And the New York City stop and frisk is one of the most well-known out there right now for police stop data. Some experiences of racial profiling can be negative because of, a negative experience that they have with them. So some examples can be an African American male is pulled over for no reason. When the officer approaches the vehicle to inform them why he's being pulled over, it's because they fit a description of a suspect in the vehicle that they're driving. A successful Hispanic male is driving a nice 2016 Lexus RX and is pulled over for no apparent reason. The officer won't tell them why they pulled them over when it's more than likely the fact that they seem out of place for driving a nice vehicle. The perception of the public on racial profiling can affect the relationships with the police. Perceptions can influence their trust in law enforcement, as well as discouraging them to cooperate when police need assistance on an investigation or any other practice. Many factors can play into how an individual perceives the police, such as their gender, race, wealth, where they live, how they were raised, and age, just to name a few. Racial tension also affects one's attitudes and perceptions towards these law enforcement officers. According to McNeely and Grothoff, racial tension is when members in a community feel as if they're threatened by other groups of individuals in their community just because of their race. In an article I found by Higgins and Gabidon, they look at the public's opinion on racial profiling and they focus on white perceptions. They found that individuals' views on racial profiling relate to their age and gender. So when the individual is older, they are less likely to view racial profiling as being discriminatory and just that racial profiling is a police tactic. This could be because whites are less likely to experience racial profiling, although they do experience racial profiling sometimes. With regards to gender, they found that males were more than likely than females to support the use of racial profiling, even though they have a negative view towards police. Since males are usually the targets of policing practices, they have more of a negative view towards them. Some vehicle cues, such as this hoopty in the picture on the slide, is how officers look at individuals. So this vehicle is a drug courier vehicle in the eyes of an officer. And I found a study that looked at whether or not officers associate a certain type of vehicle to a racial or ethnic group, which can be perceived as holding any contraband or any involvement in any criminal activity. If officers make decisions based on how a vehicle looks, as well as the driver of the vehicle, then this identifies that the officer is participating in racial profiling. I found an example of racial profiling on YouTube and I thought it was wonderful. So I wanted to include it in my presentation. In the video, there's a white male, a black male, and a pretty girl. They're all using tools to get a bike off its chain. The white male and black male both dressed in a similar fashion and were around the same age. When the white male is trying to get the bike off the chain, people would ask if he lost his lock, stared at him while he was using those tools to get the bike off, and would ask questions, and only 2 people tried to stop him. The black male was next and was immediately confronted. People kept asking questions. Someone even called 911 on him. People took pictures of the incident for evidence, and he was even yelled at by an older gentleman who got up in his face because he was trying to saw the bike lock off. But when it was the pretty girl's turn, men stopped and helped and even asked if she needed help, which describes racial profiling at its finest in the United States. It happens in everyday society, and it's been engraved into the back of almost every American's brain that African Americans are bad people and pretty girls don't typically commit crimes, which is a major issue in not only law enforcement, but nationwide. The media doesn't help with racial profiling either, as they don't report the full story and create tensions between the races. The media plays a huge role in racial profiling since it typically shows that African Americans and Hispanics are criminals, and they don't really do that with whites. I found a great article that brought up some valid points about an issue that happened with James Meeks. He was an African American senator and minister to one of the biggest black churches in Illinois and was pulled over by a police sergeant who happened to be white. According to Meeks, he got out of the car and identified who he was, and the officer shouted back at him to get in his bleeping car while pointing a gun at his face. African Americans in the community were outraged by this and ordered an investigation to be done over the incident. Over the next few months, more details emerged over this incident, which was that Meeks' driver was guilty of failing to fully stop at a stop sign, wasn't wearing a seatbelt, drove on the left side of the center lane, all while the vehicle was uninsured. It was then found that the officer was justified in getting out his gun because Meeks' driver was refusing the sergeant's orders to get back in the vehicle. The officer was found to have acted appropriately in the situation except for using profound language to gain control of the situation, which he was reprimanded for. Some recommendations that I have is that law enforcement should always inform an individual as to why they're stopping them, and it needs to be a valid reason. We need to create better policing tactics by creating effective training and have better assessment tools for officers when they need to initiate a stop. Create more of a positive environment with law enforcement officers and citizens, as well as trying to prevent the media from showing the world just a small portion of what happened and have them discuss incidents in their entirety. And here's my works cited. That's all I have for you tonight. Have a great night.